if you want to remain calm, if you want to be composed, you want to be collected when the excrement hits the fan, you have to put in the work and prepare for it before that excrement storm hits.
I wish I'd have said that. I wish I'd have said that, because that's exactly the capture of the notion of preparation equals performance.
Welcome to the Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. This is an episode you won't want to miss, as it includes a phenomenal story fit for the big screen. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Admiral Jim Loy as we discuss the power of remaining calm and maintaining composure. He is a graduate of the United States Coast Guard Academy. He served as the commander of a patrol boat in the Vietnam War, went on to become the 21st Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard, that's leading the entire Coast Guard, and afterward served as the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, including a brief stint as Acting Secretary of Homeland Security in 2005. Among his numerous medals, he's been awarded multiple Distinguished Service Medals, a Legion of Merit, and a Bronze Star. Following his retirement from the Coast Guard and federal government, he served on the board of directors of Lockheed Martin. In 2014, the Coast Guard honored him by renaming the Institute for Leadership after him. Admiral, welcome to the Science of Leadership, and thanks for being here, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Admiral, today we're talking about the value and impact when we, as leaders, remain calm and keep our composure. When we talked before, you shared with me a story about when you were a young ensign that remains actually one of the most captivating I heard from the 51 four-star officers that I've interviewed. Can you set the stage and share that story with us, because it really leads wonderfully into today's topic?
Sure, happy to. I think the story you're referring to was when I was a young officer on my first ship. The Coast Guard was then responsible for manning what we called ocean stations, which were points of water across the Atlantic that facilitated safety for, first and foremost, for sailors that were plying those waters, and secondly, for transatlantic aircraft. As they left the continent of Europe or Africa and came to the United States, they went over these waypoints, and we became basically points on a map for them, so they could assure themselves that they were going where they wanted to be and hopefully end up where they wanted to end up. So in the middle of that, on one occasion, this was in February of 1965, the North Atlantic Ocean was basically upside down. There was a huge set of storms, actually.
Squalls.
These were dramatically more than squalls. These were hurricane kind of experiences. Right. And for anybody that's a sailor at all, or has even thought about being on the ocean in the middle of one of those, you can imagine the sea state was, we were facing 30 to 40 foot seas, and we were constantly facing that as this set of storms went by. And on one occasion, our chore as being on that ocean station was to make certain that we were where we were supposed to be, so those transatlantic aircraft could actually identify us as being in the right place. On this one occasion, we were at the one end of our patrol area and had to make the turn in these 40-foot seas to go back to the other end of this simple line on the map that took us from a point at the northeast end to the point on the southwest end, and turned around and went back into it because the swell system was basically out of the northeast. And so on this occasion, I had done it before. We had made this turn on my watch before, but as I was at a porthole on the front end of the bridge, timing my effort, because it was a twin-screwed ship, so I had to accelerate the engine on the outboard side of the turn that I was about to make, reduce the turns on the inboard side to accelerate a spin, if you will, of the ship through the turn to go back down swell. And my captain on my ship was a guy named Jack Forrester. Jack Forrester had been literally on the bridge for about 2 days without either. He slept a little bit in the so-called captain's chair on the bridge. He had been served, minimum meals in that chair. But his self-appointed duties as the safety overseer was to ensure that his ship, when he was the captain, was going to be safely navigated by the guys like me who were young officers on watch. And so as we were about to make this turn, I was glued to the porthole, which was dead center on the front of the bridge, so as to make the timing appropriate. I reached back to the engine order telegraph to accelerate that outboard shaft like I just described to you. And before I could accelerate that outboard shaft, a hand came down over my hand, picked it up and put it on the correct engine order telegraph. In other words, I had given a command to the helmsman to turn the ship to port, and I was accelerating the wrong shaft that would have actually competed with that command. And so for me that night, it was he never said a word. Captain Forrester never said a word. He just picked up my hand and put it over on the other engine order telegraph to make sure we executed the turn safely at that moment. An extraordinary. Nobody else on the bridge ever knew what was going on. I mean, there were probably 8 or 10 additional watchstanders on the bridge with their responsibilities. None of them ever knew what was going on. And Captain Forrester's calm, deliberate demeanor in the midst of this nightmare, to have not only the presence of mind to not be screaming his head off at me, but further to just ensure the safety of the vessel by sort of pretending nothing had ever happened. He just picked up my hand, put it on the right EOT. I accelerated it properly. The turn was made very safely, and off we went in the opposite direction. So for me, the lessons of leadership learned in the midst of all of that stuck with me literally for the rest of my 40 years in the Coast Guard. My opportunities thereafter for commanding my own ships were abetted by that memory literally for the rest of my seagoing career, and really for the rest of my life. Because it says, in the midst of the storm, those who remain calm and collected and focus on the work to be done are those that we all pay attention to, and in my case, emulate for the rest of your life. And so that story is one that will live with me forever, as you can imagine. And it's just one that I think taught me so much at a very early time in my career about what leadership was all about. Leadership in this instance was all about mission focus, getting the job done safely, and beyond that, not embarrassing this poor dumb ensign that had his hand on the wrong engine order telegraph handle.
Yes, sir. Well, and in my mind, when you first told me that story, and just to sort of fill it out how I see it for those who are listening, the movie The Perfect Storm that was
Sure.
out a couple decades ago. I imagine sort of that, where it's just these insane waves that are buffeting the ship and so forth, and the timing of that, if it's not perfect, it could be catastrophic, life ending for everybody on that vessel. And here you are about to take everybody to the bottom in a sense, probably, and he just calmly, coolly, collected, helped you in that moment without losing his composure. Tremendous lesson,
and without embarrassing me, because that was something that I think was also on his mind. He was that huge a life character for me at that point. That beyond the safety issues, which you just described are absolutely correctly, there was a moment there where he could have sort of gone off the deep end, and no pun intended. he could have focused a lot more wrath in my direction. But what he chose to make it was a teaching moment in leadership, and literally that stood me in good stead for the rest of my Coast Guard career, for the rest of my life, because you can translate that to all kinds of different settings. And for me, the upshot of that became a sort of a catchphrase that was that I actually wrote a book about, called Preparation Equals Performance. And at the other end of the day, the better you prepare for the eventualities that you may or may not encounter, the dramatically better you're going to perform if and when it hits, so to speak.
Yeah. Just to round out thinking about the impact that moment had on you and his calmness, it seems to me, and you can tell me whether or not you think this is correct, but I can imagine, had it gone a different direction, if he would have acted in a different manner, if he would have become inflamed, angry, embarrassed you, your 40 years in the Coast Guard may have never come to fruition. It could have led to a completely different outcome for you.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, he was at the same time handling the moment nightmare that could have, would have, should have happened, and how well he handled it so that it didn't happen. That then became a life lesson for me to carry through another 40 years in the uniform when I was confronted with a dozen, 20, whatever the number is, other situations. And for me to be able to think back and reckon on how he handled that moment, a life lesson, as I say, that has turned for me into an important part of my demeanor and certainly my leadership capabilities for the rest of my life.
So you mentioned, preparation equals performance, which you did. I've read your book, and that is foundational in that. As you think about that experience of Captain Forrester and his calmness and so forth, what were the other big leadership lessons that you took away from that moment?
I would think the first one is the notion of responsibility and what responsibility means.
Mm-hmm.
There is that epic responsibility of the moment that he showed that particular night. But then there's the underlying ground level foundational responsibility notion that was the basis on which his action that night actually was mounted. In other words, was it not for the idea of preparing well over time so as to perform well of the moment? That can be a lifelong experience, not just that crucial 30 seconds, associated with the of the moment when it occurs, especially when in a seagoing kind of a atmosphere and career, you just don't know when those moments are coming. And so the preparation process has to be such that you've touched all those bases along the way so that if and when that moment occurs, your performance is going to be predictable, and it's going to be satisfactory, and it's going to be hopefully be all that's necessary, because you've got this mindset you've built over time to think about and learn lessons from your life's experiences that are additive in nature and get you to the point of being, quote unquote, prepared, such that when it's in the blades, as you say, you are able to translate to performance that is required, first of all, necessary and adequate to the task that you are encountering.
I think as I think about this idea of preparation equals performance and the sense of calmness that Captain Forrester demonstrated, I think those are when we practice hard, when we undertake different exercises to model potential events, we form somewhat to a certain degree muscle memory, but also cognitive, neural pathways that then we can perform those tasks almost without thinking and in a much calmer state because we know that we've done it before.
Precisely. That is as good a collective reasoning process for this whole notion of preparation equals performance that I've heard. It's the recognition on the front end as to how valuable that will be for you someday. That is what we should find a way in our juniors, in our children, in our colleagues, in our whatever, to facilitate that mental process you just referred to not wait until the bomb went off, rather think carefully about circumstances, your responsibilities, whatever they may be, what could happen, what might happen, and think carefully in advance about what your behavior is going to be if and when, God forbid, those kind of things actually confront you, such that when they actually do, your preparation equals performance notion has whetted your blade to the point where you can slice through the fog and get done what needs to get done.
Yeah, it's this concept in neuroscience that when we think about how we will behave, how we will act, it turns out we have a higher tendency to actually do that.
Yes, exactly.
And so it goes very much hand in hand with the positive envisioning and sports psychology that we see in high level athletes, where they think through, okay, here's how I'm going to behave in this moment, and then they actually go out and do it.
If you're on the free throw line with no time left on the clock and you're down one and you've got two coming, that's when it's all about muscle memory, as you just described, and the ability to swallow whatever it is that's trying to get out and just go through the routine of making a free throw. And when they go in, that's the ultimate evidence, so to speak, that your preparation for performance was probably pretty good.
As I listened to this harrowing tale that I've told folks multiple times, and as I've shared with you, it takes a big spot in the book that I've written. I mean, it's at the beginning of one of the chapters. Thinking back for you, as putting yourself more in Jack Forrester's sort of position, I guess.
Okay.
Does a particular harrowing event from your career where you were the leader jump out in your mind where you had to remain calm in the face of really tremendous circumstances?
As a Coast Guard officer, ship driver kind of guy, yes, there are cases I can look back on with that kind of, I was about to use the word fear, and I don't mind using that word, because at the other end of the day, whatever endorphins start rolling, when you're frightened about some outcome and you have the capacity and the responsibility to do something about it, fear can be a very good thing. So, having said that, yes, I was the commanding officer of an 82-foot patrol boat in Vietnam. Spent a year doing patrols associated with keeping the North from resupplying the South. Our whole effort as a group we have 26 Coast Guard patrol boats over there, and scattered, if you will, around the periphery of the South Vietnamese coast. And our challenge was to keep the North from resupplying the Viet Cong, or including North Vietnamese regulars, if those guys were there, and they often were, to keep them from being resupplied from seaward. That focused everything onto the Ho Chi Minh Trail, if you remember the days of such news, which afforded the rest of the U.S. military and the South Vietnamese capabilities to be focused on the trail, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and minimize the opportunity the North had to resupply those activists that were, raising holy hell in the South. The idea in terms of the price of failure, all of those things run into your mental state as you are, in my case, the commanding officer of an 82-foot patrol boat with a crew of 12, doing responsible for this bit of coastline for the time that we're there, and then cycle back for resupplies and all that, and what have you, and be relieved by somebody else. That set of responsibilities had life and death consequences associated with it, as you can imagine. War is hell and always is going to be, one way or the other. And as a result of that, the amazing set of responsibility elements that come to I was only out of the Coast Guard Academy 3 years when I was over there doing this. So I had one tour of duty with Jack Forrester on the Coast Guard Cutter Absecon. Then I had a very short 10-month tour here in the U.S. on a patrol boat as a commanding officer, and then off to Vietnam. And so the preparation process, both in terms of the mechanics of ship handling and all that, was provided as part of the prep process, getting one ready to go do that. Then it was the psychological profile process you were describing just a moment ago that had to be married to the mechanics of running a patrol boat in Norfolk, Virginia, as opposed to the mechanics plus of running a patrol boat with the responsibilities that were provided to us as COs of those Coast Guard patrol boats in Vietnam. So again, that enabled, those were the days when I was beginning to think my way to this process of what preparation equals performance really is. And I've written a couple books about it in the aftermath of that, where once it had, gelled in my mind and in my experience base to the point that I could perhaps share that with others in a fashion that would be of value to them in their preparation equals performance process. And so the whole remaining calm and retaining your composure in the middle of the crisis, whether that's a weather-driven crisis, whether that's a wartime situation, whether that is a search and rescue case that you're on in and of the moment, it is such that my effort was trying to design the mental side of the preparation process so as to be applicable in any of those situations. It was a general kind of preparation process, not just so you can do this one thing better, but rather an across the board gathering and skill, getting your skill set where it needed to be. And again, to go back to your very, very valid point, to continue to nurture the mental approach to being a commanding officer and exerting leadership when necessary. All of that became recognizable as something to put a lot of energy into.
Yes, sir. Well, I think as we think about this, clearly it's important in the military. When I think about as myself as a pediatric cardiologist and a physician, there are plenty of times when it would be easy to lose control of our faculties and so forth. For instance, if we have a child who has a sudden event, let's say in the ICU,
yes,
and we need to intervene, that's the time when we need to have our wits about us and be able to think logically and so forth. And so this idea we have frequently, every couple of years, we have to take training where we're doing resuscitation efforts and with mannequins and different things so that we are prepared in an ongoing manner and that we're ready for those circumstances, because just there in medicine, as in military context, as in somebody who's up against a hard deadline for General Motors or whomever it may be, any of those stressful situations, if we haven't thought carefully, if we haven't put the pieces in place, then our
you can
amygdala
you can get lost.
is going to take over. Yes, sir. So that's a good opportunity for me to just kind of dip in to kind of some of the science behind this for our listeners,
Okay.
since this is a science of leadership. But when we as leaders are able to remain calm and keep our composure in these challenging circumstances, it actually can have a number of positive effects on us and our team as well as the situation. And I'll touch on a few of those, and we will include references in our show notes and description. First, when we're able to maintain calm and composure, it instills in us, or I should say in those we're leading, confidence and trust. And Daniel Goleman has written a lot about this, not only in his book, Emotional Intelligence, but also in journal articles. And secondly, when we remain calm, we're so much better at making rational and wise decisions. And you've kind of touched on this, but
Exactly.
Daniel Kahneman, who's different than Daniel Goleman, but Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate, he actually studied this and has written about it. One of a pretty popular book that covers this concept is Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a book that he's written. It's a,
I'm going to write that.
I must say it's,
I'm going to write that one down.
Yes, sir. It's a tome, I will say that, and for that reason, I haven't read it yet, but I've kind of got the cliff notes on it. The third thing is stress and anxiety are contagious. If we as leaders are freaking out, those we're trying to lead
Absolutely.
will freak out.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's almost the opposite of leadership. You know, the leader
exactly.
is attempting to hold on to the calm and serenity necessary to be thoughtful and methodical about going through whatever you go through to make a good decision at the other end of the day. And if you are freaking out, that's just not going to happen.
Admiral, that gives me an idea for a study. I'm going to have to write that down when we get finished, and really look at that as perhaps within medicine, but beyond, the impact that would have. But certainly, if we remain calm, it reduces the stress and anxiety of our team, and when that happens, our team performs better.
Absolutely.
And a number of studies have shown that, I can say. A fourth effect that happens when we remain calm is that it helps us and our team maintain clarity and a long-term perspective. We don't lose sight of the bigger picture of what we're actually trying to accomplish. And I think that's so important when we're in an organization that has that bigger long-term kind of picture. And then a final one that I would mention is that it fosters a positive culture in our group and our organization. And several authors have shown that in their studies. And again, for those who are listening, I'll include those in the show notes and in the description too. Admiral, as we've gone through this, you've shared, compelling experiences both in the North Atlantic with your harrowing story there, also in your service, off the coast of Vietnam, where leaders' composures, really meant the difference between life and death.
Absolutely.
And how that's echoed through really a storied career on your part. And then obviously we just touched on some of the science on it, but thinking practically for our listeners, how can you make this this idea of remaining calm, of being collected, sort of practical for them? I guess really I'm asking a couple questions here is how do we build that muscle memory of remaining calm?
Yeah.
And then secondly, how do we actually, in that moment, in the maelstrom, how do we actually maintain composure? If you had a framework or a process to do that, what would that be?
Well, the framework and process for me is this notion of PEP, the preparation equals performance. And then one has to be confident and comfortable when the moment comes that the preparation process is going to be adequate to the task. And otherwise, we'll freak out on those occasions and not put into practice all that we have prepared in terms of our personal capabilities. And some of those are literally of the moment kind of circumstances, like we were describing a couple of times earlier. And others are stretched over time with regard to how we cope with the elements of the tasking that we confront that perhaps we never imagined would be there. And again, it goes back to those who have prepared well, who have thought their way through that, are infinitely more capable of diverging to this tangent, that, or the other tangent when those occur in the middle of the strife, because they're anticipating that this long, narrow highway going directly forward is perhaps not the ones that we're going to be on. We might veer to the left, we might veer to the right, we might veer wherever we need to veer to accomplish the nightmare that we're facing in and of the moment. So one of the things when I became Commandant of the service, we made a point in the Flag Corps. The Flag Corps is that in my time, 24 flag officers, admirals, a couple of different grade levels, but 24 admirals that comprised the leadership of the Coast Guard at the time. we made a point of exercising them twice a year. We would bring them all together for the purpose of all the good stuff that has to be done at a conference, so to speak.
Sure.
But as part of the conference, I inserted a moment where we designed a challenge. We designed a scenario to put all of the Coast Guard flag officers through, with the idea in mind that it would spur not only the idea that we can solve that particular problem, but would also spur this preparation equals performance fundamental, almost biblical in my terms, way of going about life, and certainly life in the Coast Guard facing Coast Guard likely Coast Guard circumstances. I received lots of thank you notes, so to speak, from those guys and gals. Later, when I was gone and off and doing something else, they recalled being sat down and challenged with a learning process, that set of experience-laden processes that would give them the life tools they needed on the occasion, if and when that set of circumstances was facing them, or a variant of it that they could apply lessons learned in our exercises. So in the twice a year sessions, in the 4 years I had the job, we had those moments during our collective flag conference where the purpose was to challenge them first with a pretty crazy scenario and see what they could come up with, to see what they did with it. And then we had some very interesting real life challenges along the way. We had been in the Department of Transportation for a long time. Coast Guard originated in the Treasury Department. When 1967, when transportation was formed, it became one of the several nuclei, if you will, organizations that generated the new Department of Transportation. And then when DHS was founded in 2005, in the nightmare aftermath of all that went on there, the Coast Guard went to DHS. So I've had these multiple opportunities to watch my Coast Guard become a leader or to just go along with the tide in these dramatic organizational changes into the executive branch of government at the federal level. And in each one of those opportunities, I tried to fall back on what I had mentally developed in this preparation equals performance dynamic that would better prepare us to do what was being asked of us in the new organizational lash-up that was facing us. And that involved all kinds of crazy things that we had to do to be a better agent, if you will, in transportation going to DHS. And as a result, I think sometimes we don't even recognize the value of some of these nightmarish or perhaps too strong a word, but reorganizational challenges that we have to practice what we do really well and learn along the way what it is that we're not doing so well, with a view in mind of identifying that and putting it on the table to find a way to fix it and get us back to the level of performance that we demand of ourselves, have become accustomed to, and that our bosses, whoever they may be, including the populace at large, recognizes if the Coast Guard's got it, it's going to be done well. I wanted them to think that. But then that was an obligation on my part to make sure that we did. Yeah, that's right. Talk's cheap. Behavior counts.
Yeah. So really, you've framed it very well. Again, with preparation equals performance. And there was something that you entered into that conversation as I was listening to you that really jumped out at me. But and I'll come back to that in a second. But the idea, again, we've kind of hit on it multiple times during this podcast, is that if you want to remain calm, if you want to be composed, you want to be collected, when the excrement hits the fan, you have to put in the work and prepare for it before that excrement storm hits.
I wish I'd have said that. I wish I'd have said that, because that's exactly the capture of the notion of preparation equals performance. I even went beyond talking about it to putting together what I called PEP awards. PEP was the same, preparation equals performance. But they were little. I wish I'd have brought one. They're little ceramic blocks, about 2 inches cubes, and it's got a little thing on the top, which is all about preparation equals performance, and some magic words as to why that's important. And I made a point of finding success and good preparation, for example, at the Coast Guard headquarters building. Now, there's a bunch of staff, admin weenies and whatever, but those guys all had been on ships or whatever, and now they're doing their penance at Coast Guard headquarters.
Yes, sir.
And in my time as commandant in the so-called front office, when something exceptional was done in the building, administratively, operationally, or in whatever fashion, I would take one of my little pep awards and go to that officer, to that office, to that staff, to that whatever, and reinforce it with a pep award. And interestingly enough, I didn't give out so many of them as to make their value decline. I gave out those who truly, in my mind, had earned that recognition, made a little pomp and circumstance out of it, in terms of the actual delivery of the little block. And then when I realized it was of value at Coast Guard headquarters, in my last 2 years as commandant, I found a way to identify those kind of things happening out in the field as well. And on my various visits, should my staff or my own recollection of something that had occurred there merit the awarding of a pep award, did it out there too. And they got to be collector's items of sorts, in terms of the troops that were so awarded.
Yeah, I imagine people really cherish those sorts of awards because it's really coming from the top person in their branch.
Exactly. You're right on. And even though it's not a ribbon to be hung on your chest or whatever, that little block of cement is sitting on my desk, and the boss felt it of value enough to take time out of his day to come over to my office, and make that totally unannounced. Just slide on in there, have that conversation with them, thank them for whatever it was that prompted the award. And that became an interesting additional way of recognizing really good performance.
I mentioned just a second ago, there was another thing that really jumped out at me when you were saying it earlier, was this idea of when you've prepared, trust that preparation will be effective, that you will be in that moment, you will be effective. And when you trust the process, then you're able to perform at that high level.
Absolutely, because otherwise you're probably going to be worrying about elements of what you otherwise would have had in that process. And your mind is concentrating on some of that when it ought to be focused on the nightmare at hand, to handle the tragedy that you're trying to deal with. One example I'd give you is you remember when we lost JFK Jr., when his plane went down in off Long Island Sound. The whole notion there, when the Coast Guard, the immediate assets of the Coast Guard in Long Island and in New York were attempting to find the plane, before because it sadly had actually sunk. The challenge associated with that, to me, was extended to the impacted family, the Kennedy family. Now, would I have done that for the Smith family from Roanoke? I would like to think I would have. But what I made myself remember was that the people hugely impacted by this is not my guys out there searching for whatever they're going to do whatever they're supposed to do, but it's the family that doesn't have any answers to the ultimate questions for them yet. And so I made it a point to find a spokesman. I had friends in the White House at the time because I was the commandant, and I found out who the right player was in the Kennedy family that I could use to update them on the activity set that we were about in prosecuting the case. Found out who that gentleman was, and I made it a point in my own mind that not to let more than 2 hours go by without just ringing him up and giving him the latest, which he then passed on to the family at Hyannisport. It was with the total blessing, well, not at the beginning, but when my boss found out that I was doing that, he was okay with that as well. But bottom line, it was one of those instinctive things where, as a leader, part of your responsibility is to not keep everybody in the dark, to not keep your crew in the dark, to not keep your, and in this case, that aperture widened to not keep the very people that was a dozen of them or 20 of them or whatever in the immediate Kennedy family, including her name was Carolyn Bissett, I believe, was his wife's maiden name. So when I recognized that I was doing this for the Kennedys, I was ashamed of myself for not recognizing that I needed to be doing it maybe even more for the Bissett family, because the Kennedy family had so many opportunities to find out what they wanted to find out. So that whole experience of just listening to the tone of voices at the other end of the phone when I was trying to give them factual information as opposed to what they might have been seeing on TV or whatever, became a driving influence for me to not only in this case, but to log that away, to put that one in the bank and recognize the legitimacy and the value thereof in whatever might be the next case that comes down the road. And to share that, by the way, with all those flag officers that we were talking about before, as a lesson I learned in the course of this particular case, for you to take stock of, use it, don't use it, but take stock of it as a lesson. Hey, the boss learned this as a result of that. Maybe I should figure out my version of that as I go forward in my own leadership growth. So those kind of moments are sometimes of equal value. They might not make it to the front page, but boy, they have enormous impact on the immediate players that need to have that impact.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times as leaders, the most impactful things we could do never make the front page. Certainly.
Amen.
I agree with that.
Amen.
Well, as you think about what we've been talking about regarding remaining calm and keeping your composure,
Yep.
Are there other things that we should be thinking about? Is there anything else you think it would be good to touch on?
The PEP process is one thing, but to really think your way through almost what I'd call the academic end of understanding leadership and understanding how good leadership leads to performance in our lives. That was really what drove me to writing the second book, The Architecture of Leadership. You indicated you had touched the base.
Yes, sir.
Another extraordinary sidebar. Don and I have become dear trends, as you can imagine, after struggling our way through 2 books together. His version, my version, our version, and the one that got published. Here's one of those moments of ultimate trust and learning. Don Phillips, after we wrote together Character in Action and The Architecture of Leadership, sent his son to the Coast Guard Academy.
I'll be honest with you. After reading the book, not The Architecture of Leadership, but the other one,
Character in Action.
Yeah, Character in Action. I can't tell you the depth of regret that I did not go to the Coast Guard Academy. I was like, oh my goodness, I really screwed up on that one. I should have done that. But anyway, yeah.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that thought. The notion there about it's one thing to have had this extraordinarily fulfilling life that I have had, and it's then the next responsibility I felt to share it with others in a fashion that would stimulate their own version of what constitutes good leadership for them, and to have them recognize how important it is to have their own learning process attended to that. It's not going to come in. It's not going to come in the mail someday. It's going to come as a result of a lot of effort put into gaining the skill set necessary to be a good leader, the mental approach prowess necessary to be a good leader, and then those opportunities to demonstrate those skills that do come in front of you will be your chances to not only practice what you've learned, but to recognize what you still have to learn and go back or go forward in any fashion you need to recognize leadership as a lifelong learning process.
Yes.
Yeah, you might reach a plateau where you can get A, B, C, D, and E done, but you're not so good at E, F, and G yet. And you might reach that plateau, but there's still others to continue to learn. I would like to think, and especially my wife reinforces this for me, I still have a lot to learn.
Indeed. Yeah, wives are good at that.
They are really good. Mine is one of the best.
Yeah. Well, Admiral Loy, it's been a delight to get to talk with you again, and I really appreciate you coming on the Science Leadership to share just a very small portion of your great wealth of leadership knowledge and wisdom, and some of these stories and concepts with us.
It's been my pleasure. As usual, when the date was coming at me, I had to go prepare some to get ready for our conversation, and I wanted to make that as worthwhile as I could for your listeners, of course. But in the doing of that, I find the relevance of the don't put it on the shelf and let it atrophy notion is very real. So whatever I'm doing at the age of 82, maybe it's just cleaning up the backyard after the dog, but I want to do it really well. And any of these lessons that I tried to write about that were so important for me to share in my Coast Guard community, I have found by teaching at William & Mary and doing some other things as well, that they are as relevant in so many other communities, not just inside the Coast Guard. And I have tried, when opportunities were made available to me, to take my little Parthenon. I'm sure you've seen the Parthenon sketch with me as a basis from which I can help folks recognize the legitimacy of preparing well to perform well, and allow them to focus in their own lives, however they may. That maybe there's something to that.
Yes, sir. I think that's a great one to end our episode on. Thank you.
All right, sir. God bless, and thank you for please pass to your listeners my appreciation for their willingness to listen.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.